Good evening, everyone. Welcome to India Rural Colloquy 2022. We will begin our session shortly, but before we begin, we'd like to present the colloquy anthem. So please sit back and enjoy.
उसी अगस्त की बेला में हम सौगंध उठाते हैं, सशक्त राष्ट्र के सपने को चलो मिलकर आज सजाते हैं। हर युवा को रोजगार मिले, हर नारी की आजादी हो, हर घर स्वास्थ्य सबल बने, ये गली गली मुनादी हो।
Over to you, Neerja.
Good evening, everyone. I am Neerja Gudrimoti, extending a very warm welcome to all of you on behalf of Transforming Rural India Foundation to the second edition of the Indian Rural Colloquy. Today's session is Nutrition Security for India, the Agriculture and Community Unlock, and is the 7th session in this year's Colloquies lineup. The topic is not new to any of us, and we all recognize that agriculture for nutrition has been part of many important discussions. Yet, with 8 years remaining to achieve the SDG targets 2.1 and 2.2, that is to end hunger, food insecurity, and all forms of malnutrition, India still struggles with anemia among women, low improvement in child's nutrition, and women's economic condition, resulting in them not having access to nutritious food. Hence, agriculture for food, food for nutrition, diversity of food both regionally and seasonally, both are opportunities as well as challenges ahead for all of us. We at TRIF are highly dedicated to focus on achieving nutrition security using a whole of society approach through actionable pathways and supporting repurposing of policy support for convergent action. TRIF, together with PwC India, has also laid down a framework for National Program of Agriculture Nutrition Linkages and Pathways, namely own produced, local market bought, and public provision, with a community-first approach. This study is also available on our website. With this context, I would like to welcome our esteemed panel today. This panel is deeply committed and engaged with the issue and has been advocating going beyond business as usual. We have Arun Baral, the global CEO of Harvest Plus, who has been at the forefront of developing bio-fortified crops and most importantly, building bio-fortified seed and crop value chains. He oversees the interdisciplinary global effort of Harvest Plus to deliver and develop micronutrient-rich staple food crops to reduce micronutrient deficiency or hidden hunger among malnourished populations. Arun joins us from the US today, and we are very grateful to him for making time on a weekend. This is indeed a very special for us. It's a privilege to have you with us today, Arun.
Thank you.
We have Dr. Rajan Shankar, who is the founding director at the India Nutrition Initiative, TINI, and the senior advisor for nutrition at Tata Trust. He is India's go-to person to fix the nutrition conundrum. His expertise span the public as well as private sectors, ensuring delivery of portion through Swasth Bharat products and fixing Anganwadis, about which the recent Nobel laureate Esther Duflo had once written, putting a band-aid on coughs. He has led from the front the food fortification in public distribution and essentials like milk. We are very grateful, sir, for your continued mentorship to TRF's nutrition program. We have Shamal Santra, TRIF's health and nutrition lead. He is someone who brings public system delivery alive with community leadership. He closely works with the National Health Mission in Jharkhand on a scalable model of people public panchayat for improving health and nutrition outcomes. The Health System Transformation Fellows, placed with the Chief Medical Officers, showed how systems can be nudged to deliver better. Shamal also leads the efforts in Bihar, Jharkhand, MP on leveraging the 15th Finance Commission Fund for augmenting the frontline health infrastructure. I thank you for joining us today, Shamal. And last but not the least, the session will be held together by Purnima Menon, Senior Research Fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute. She is a global authority on nutrition. She co-convenes a global nutrition policy course with the Institute for Development Studies in the UK. She is IFPRI's theme lead for South Asian Nutrition Program. She has conducted multiple implementation research on scaling up maternal and child nutrition interventions, including evaluating large-scale behavior change communications program in nutrition and health. Very grateful, Purnima, for agreeing to help us understand better the challenges and pathways for addressing nutrition poverty, and particularly the intersection issues of agriculture, poverty, health, and nutrition. I'm grateful for her to joining us today as the moderator. Welcome, Purnima.
Thank you. Thank you.
So today, it also gives me immense pleasure to present the findings from India's first ever large-scale food plate mapping survey conducted by our Development Intelligence Unit, which focuses on dietary variation, micronutrient sufficiency, and heterogeneity across different zones in the country. For this, we have Mr. Sandeep Ghosh with us. Sandeep is presently engaged as a senior fellow at the Development Intelligence Unit and a team lead at Sambodhi panels. He has been part of the research consulting industry for nearly 30 years. This survey will be periodically done by the DIU. The data and evidences will help us connect to the session and contextualize our conversation today. I now welcome Purnima to the floor for her opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Neerja, and it's such a pleasure to join you all today. I'm, truly honored because, my association or sort of knowledge of TIRF goes to before TIRF was started, and it's just really, wonderful to see what you're trying to pull together here in terms of really transforming what happens in rural lives, which is just so incredibly important in India. Now, let me, start my opening remarks with sort of just acknowledging the challenge that you placed in front of the group of, what malnutrition itself looks like in and across India. I think we're at a point as we look at, my team has been looking especially at a lot of the data from the last National Family Health Survey. And I just want to acknowledge that what we have is really a presence of numerous forms of malnutrition manifesting in very different ways across the country. So at this point in time, whether you look at a district in southern India or a district in, eastern UP or a district in, western Rajasthan or a district in, way east in the northeast, you're going to find that there is some form of malnutrition that is prominent in that district, whether it is overweight, obesity, or non-communicable diseases, or childhood undernutrition, or anemia, or perhaps, the clustering of all of these forms. And while, that leaves us really disturbed on, of course, because this is something that I think nobody wants to see as one of our development challenges in India. But if we step back from it and sort of build on what do we understand about why malnutrition occurs and what do we understand about how malnutrition improves, I think we begin to understand that poor diets are really one of the many things, or one of the key things, I would say, at the root of these many forms of malnutrition. Whether you're concerned about how children grow, whether you're concerned about, how much hemoglobin is there in anybody's body, whether you're concerned about, whether people are overweight or whether people have non-communicable diseases, we keep coming back to what is the food that is on our plates and what does it look like over the lifetime of human beings who are growing up and sort of living lives in different contexts, in many ways that simplifies how we can think about the linkages between agriculture and nutrition, to say that one of the primary things that agriculture must do for nutrition is enable people to have healthy lives year-round and lifelong. It's no small challenge, and we're very far from achieving that. But that is what I look at agriculture for. I don't look at agriculture to solve the entirety of India's malnutrition challenge. I don't look at agriculture to solve anemia completely, or to solve non-communicable diseases, or to solve childhood stunting. But I do look at agriculture to solve the problem of diets. What is on our plates? What is that food coming from? Why do our plates look the way they look? And what does this look like for different people in our communities? What does this look like as we move through, the annual cycles of, whether it's agricultural cycles or weather cycles? And what does it look like over the lifetime of any individual? This very basic human need of food and diets is what we want agriculture to focus in on. And I think there are many routes to get there. In terms of how things happen, but for me, one of the first things that we have to understand is really what is on people's plates. Where is that food coming from? And so I'm really thrilled to we've again had a few prior conversations with TRIF and your Development Intelligence Unit on gathering this type of data and the importance of gathering this type of data. And so I'm really thrilled that we have now a first chance to actually get to see that, and then to begin to have that challenging conversation of, okay, from what we see on what's on people's plates, what then needs to happen in agriculture, what then needs to happen in food systems, what maybe also needs to happen in social systems, because we have to acknowledge the fact that not everybody eats the same within communities and even within families. And so, I think I also sort of reemphasize the point that food and diets are also just a huge marker, if you will, of social and familial inequities that I think also those of us working on diets and food and nutrition need to really, really get our heads around and come up with strategies. So let me not take more time than that, except to welcome the incredible panel that we have here. To again express my gratitude to being with you today. I'm really looking forward to seeing the findings of the food plate mapping exercise, and to then hosting what I hope will be a very energizing conversation on what we are seeing there and what maybe needs to be considered in the way forward. So I'll hand that back to you. So can we put the presentation on?
Yeah, so I request Sandeep now to sort of present the findings of the survey.
Right. So is it visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Fantastic. Okay, I'll try and run through this. Well, if not at super speed, but at least in a speed that will give us enough time for a conversation later on. Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me. I just want to say this about this study is there is something which was conceived and launched fairly recently at TRIF and Sambodhi panels, which we call the Rural Think Insight series. And we consciously made an effort to concentrate on the food plate mapping and food plate related studies as part and parcel of this Think Insight series. And this is the first round of data which has come out from a series like this. And going forward, there's going to be more studies on health and nutrition, different sets of questions perhaps, but some common questions so that we can track this change in India's food plate and dietary diversity scores over time. So this is, you can treat it as the first or the benchmark value which is going to be discussed as part of this this discussion. This was a fairly intensive study. As you can see, 7,332 households, and we talked to adult males and adult females, roughly with the ratio of 50-50. We covered all the 6 zones as classified by Government of India, and took at least 3, in some cases 4 states per zone to make it as representative as possible. And we covered people of all ages from 18 upwards, to different age groups. Also, there were people from different occupational profiles, which covered people from relatively higher income group to people from the lower income group as well, so that later on, as you will see, we have constructed standard of living index because we had a very nice variation of different asset ownerships across classes. So we did the analysis by SLI as well. As far as the group of food groups are concerned, we followed the FAO standards. There were 14 groups which was queried. The query was based on the last 24 hours of recall, and the analysis was done separately for males and females and separately for different zones. And the type of analysis that was done is essentially to look at nutritional security across zones in the terms of individual dietary diversity scores. I just wanted to make it very clear here that we have not done HDDI or household dietary diversity scores. We have done IDDS, which is individual dietary diversity scores. One of the reasons for this is that household dietary diversity scores tend to miss out on if you're answering for someone else, then you tend to miss out on the food that is consumed outside of home. That is why based on the FAO prescriptions, we followed an individual dietary diversity score. It also looks at heterogeneity in the nutritional security based on dietary diversity and wealth status. And finally, and last but not the least, we are going to look at sources of food procurement across zone and what every source contributes in terms of the total bulk of procurement which is required for a household. As far as the individual dietary diversity score is concerned, the 14 groups are clubbed back into 8 groups as displayed on the left. Apart from that, we looked at vitamin A consumptions as well, which is essentially looking at vitamin A rich plant-based food which was consumed, as well as animal-based foods like organ meats, egg, milk products, and so on and so forth. And finally, we also looked at iron consumption in the last 24 hours in terms of through meat or through fish. If you look at all the food groups, all the 14 food groups across all the 6 zones, and this is how it looks. If you see a consumption dip, there is a clear dip in terms of dark greeny leafy vegetables. Then there is a dip in terms of fruits. India does not seem to be consuming too much of food. Meat, I know, recent studies or recent surveys have shown that meat consumption is fairly high in India. We did not get a fairly high meat consumption because this was only on the basis of 24-hour recall. It is not that people are consuming meat all 7 days a week. Then we have fish. You might be a little bit surprised by seeing that why is Northeast such a high consumer of fish much higher than East Zone. You have to understand one thing, that the East Zone, the data gets pulled down by the data from Bihar and Jharkhand. If you take out Bihar and Jharkhand, in the East, 38% of the households eat fish across had eaten fish in the past 24 hours across Orissa and Bengal. In Northeast, the 3 states that we had covered was Nagaland, Tripura, and Assam. Tripura and Assam are fish-eating places, but in Nagaland also they consume a lot of dried fish, and that is why you've got such a high value. Oils and sweets are consumed by everybody. That's not really part of the consideration set on dietary diversity going forward. But there is a dip when it comes to sweets, and milk products are consumed the highest in case of North. And this was expected because there is a big culture of milk and milk product consumption, like paneer and all in the northern states. If you look at the 3 analysis, one is the IDDS scores, one is the vitamin A rich diet, and the iron rich diet. You can see, if you take the left one in the meat IDDS scores, you can see a dip in the north and the west. By north, we do not include UP. Uttar Pradesh is being considered as part of central India along with Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. You see a dip. One of the things which struck us as strange, well, not strange, but eye-opening, is that necessarily the more affluent states are the western states, but that doesn't mean they are the most diet diverse. Despite being one of the most affluent states, it is also the least diversified states in the country. The highest diversified IDDA scores are from the Northeast, because there is a large consumption of iron-rich products through fish and meat as well. If you look at vitamin A-rich diets through fruits and vegetables and organ meats and other meats, it's not bad. It's fairly high, except for a very significant dip in western part of India. But as you can see, the iron-rich diet, the drop of iron-rich diet in north and west is contributing correspondingly to a relatively low IDDA score in north and west of India. If you want to look at the male-female comparative, this is how it looks like. We are going to go zone-wise. One of the surprising things which we found out in a study like this, based on 24-hour recall, is that there was not a massive difference in consumption or IDDA score between males and females, though consistently in some areas at an aggregate level, the IDDA scores were slightly higher for males, but not significantly so. You have to understand this is possibly on the basis of a 24-hour recall and not basis on the last 7 days of consumption. And another important thing is that we did not capture quantity of consumption. We merely captured only consumption. Perhaps if we had captured quantity, if we had, perhaps in a consecutive survey or a successive survey, we do a consumption measurement in terms of total volume of consumption, maybe the difference between male and female will be more stark. But as you can see, this is the figures. The figures are fairly consistent across male and female. Even in the North Zone, even though in the North Zone, the individual dietary diversity score between male and female the difference was the highest, as well as for iron sufficiency. But here, again, the difference is, and this is difference out of 8, the total marks that you could have got was out of 8, is fairly similar. And in some cases, even the female dietary diversity score was even slightly higher, as you can see in the Northeast. In case of the Northeast, the female dietary diversity score is actually slightly higher than male. And this is the South and the West comparative. Yeah. In terms of heterogeneity in dietary consumption, we looked at the mean IDDA score among the top and the bottom terciles. By terciles, we simply divided the total array of the individual dietary diversity scores into 3 equal parts. The highest part was the highest tercile, the lowest part was the lowest tercile, and we just looked at the difference between the highest and the lowest tercile, and you can see the difference is highest among the Northeast and the Southern states. In fact, in the Southern states is very, very high. That means the consumption, the dietary diversity in the food plate for the average poor in South is far worse than when you compare it with the relatively affluent and relatively high dietary diversity food plates in the South. A similar situation, but not so much so, exists in the Northeast as well. This, we look at what are the food groups that is causing this difference. As you can see, zone-wise, there are about 4 or 5 food groups which have the maximum diversity between the highest tercile and the lowest tercile. The common ones are milk and milk products, where the consumption levels are very different between the high and the low terciles. Also, things like legumes and nuts and fruits and fruits which are rich in vitamin A. Consistently, these are the ones where the higher tercile and lower tercile have about 40–45% difference between consumption level. Interestingly, things like meat and fish is consumed more or less similarly across the top and the bottom terciles, but invariably it is very low, and that is why they don't figure in this. Here, similarly, as you can see, leafy vegetables is a very, very important contributor, especially in the Northeast. In the Northeast, the higher tercile people consume a lot of leafy vegetables, but the lower tercile people do not. And similarly, here again, fruits, milk products, pulses and legumes are similar products where there is a huge difference in consumption between the upper tercile and the lower tercile. Understanding heterogeneity and whether wealth status has or affordability is an important factor or not, We also calculated standard of living index based on asset ownership, and we created asset ownership scores, and we divided the scores into 3 terciles. Well, terciles is 3 into terciles, and this is the difference between these are the values of the upper tercile, the middle tercile, and the lower tercile. Here you can see the differences between the lower and the upper is perhaps highest in the Northeast, not so much so among the rest of the zones. However, there is a more interesting analysis which follows this, which essentially looks at what percentage is the upper tercile more than the lower tercile, in the sense that if in the central zone, in terms of the IDDA score, the upper tercile is 191% more than the lower tercile, but in terms of the in terms of the SLI terciles, it is only 125%. Similarly, in East, in terms of IDDA scores, the upper tercile and the lower tercile difference is 194%, but in terms of the SLI score, it's only 122%. And this is consistent across all throughout. And what this essentially means is that this is perhaps indicative that dietary diversity is as much a function of habit, and perhaps even more habit and availability than just affordability. There are a lot of elements here which are available in these, which are produced in these zones, but it is just not consumed among the lower tercile people, perhaps out of habit. And then a change in diet will also have to be thought about, apart from also thinking in terms of change in production levels. Because if it was just purely a question of availability and affordability, then even the orange lines would have been as high as the ash colored lines in terms of difference between the upper tercile and the lower tercile. Finally, this is my last slide. It's a bit complex, but I'll just try and simplify it as much as possible. This essentially looks at 5 different sources, which is own farm production, production from the local retail outlets or the local village hut, bought from the APMCs or the huts outside the village or the permanent markets, bought from the nearby town, or brought from the national ration shops. And each are color coded into red, blue, green, yellow, and ash. As you can see, as you can glance through this, some of the differences which I want to highlight is, let's take, for example, South. The primary source, whilst a primary source for most of the other places is in cereals, is own production. You can see the primary source in the Northeast and the South is PDS. It is not own production in terms of cereals. In terms of everything else, there is a huge dependency on local markets across the West. There is a huge dependency on local markets on the South as well as in the East, whereas in all other places, there is a mix between own production as well as the local market. There is in the central zone, there is a lot of purchase being done through organized markets as well as huts which are outside the village, outside non-local markets. In fact, most of the products are in the green zone. That means they are brought from the weekly or permanent markets. But by and large, cereals, there is the dependency is on own production, except for South and Northeast. For most of the other things, there is a huge requirement from the local market or from the market which is outside, which is regularized markets. And these are the places where one necessarily need to be concentrating if we want to tackle the issue of availability of different types of food products which are currently missing in the food plate. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Sandeep. That was an absolutely amazing presentation and just an excellent view of what is going on. At least a first view in a sense of what is going on there. And I think just from my perspective, a lot of potential myth busting and literally food for thought. Particularly, I think in your last slide where you highlight the importance of markets and safety nets for a majority of the food groups. I think at some point we may ask you to bring that slide back up if we want to have an additional conversation. Let us actually now turn to the panel, and I will maybe first invite you, Arun, to join us with your opening remarks. I'd like for you to maybe touch on two different points, if you will. One is, of course, any any insights or any initial reactions, perhaps, to what Sandeep has presented. Is what you are seeing in these findings, what was surprising, or anything that sort of really stuck out, especially from the perspective of the work that you are doing and leading on the role of bio-fortification and staple cereals, and the second, perhaps any reflections you have on from your perspective and from the space that you inhabit in the foods, in sort of shaping the food system, what perhaps is the role for things like bio-fortification in the context of of what we are seeing here. I'm seeing also a lot of comments come in on the chat box, and I want to remind all of the participants, if you have a specific question to the panelists, please use the Q&A box for that. We welcome your general engagement and chats in the chat box, but I think for questions, we're going to be looking at the Q&A box. So Arun, over to you, please.
Thank you, Purnima, and great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I come from India. I grew up in Delhi, so this was very enlightening to see the differences. But anyway, let me come back to the two items you wanted us to address. So, role of what is biofortification? Quickly for the audience, for grounding purposes. So, biofortification is a relatively new technology where the densities of staple crops for micronutrients, particularly iron, zinc, and vitamin A, have been increased in the staple crops. And then these crops, biofortification was a challenge earlier on, where people thought, can food be your medicine, right? Can these crops be high in densities for these key micronutrients that are essential for human health? And Harvest Plus was a program of CGIAR that sort of took on this challenge and proved the concept that yes, it can work. The crops can be bred naturally. There are various ways of doing it, but Harvest Plus focused on conventional breeding methods. So the crops were bred, and when they were eaten by people, especially who had micronutrient deficiencies, their nutrition status improved, their health improved. And I don't need to sort of emphasize how important these micronutrients are, like iron, zinc, vitamin A, iodine. Iodine comes from salt. It's a good carrier. But these other important micronutrients, if could be bred through agriculture, staple crops and agriculture could be a vector in solving this malnutrition problem. That's where Harvest Plus came in. India is leading the way. In sort of I was in India in March, and I met the Minister of Agriculture, Indian Council of Agricultural Research, their sort of senior members, their director generals, and they were taking up, they were adopting these technologies and doing a lot of good work in India. So I would like to sort of mention the role of government. The Prime Minister of India, a couple of years ago, endorsed biofortification, dedicated 17-18 crops. So all good in terms of what's happening in the area of nutrition in India. I'm glad to see that. So the role of biofortification, what biofortification can do, looking at the presentation, a few things jumped out at me, and so I'll draw the intersections really quickly. One was how prominent cereals were, especially for the people who eat what they grow. Affordability is a challenge. So Purnima talked about diets, the dinner plate, as I call it. And then if you see in India, the staples are a big part, the wheat, roti, chapati, rice. So if these can be, made more nutritious. So very simple things, let's talk very basic things. What we need to fix first is, I agree with Purnima, we got to get the diet right first. And if we can switch a normal roti with a high zinc roti for example, that will go a long ways in addressing, the zinc and the iron deficiency. Same for rice. We have rice that is high in zinc, high in iron. We have pearl millet that is high in iron. So can we make those simple switches? It doesn't require a lot of behavior change. What can happen with that switch is, we can make our food system at least a little more nutritious. Now, bio-fortification is not a silver bullet. The nutrition challenge, requires multiple approaches, but it is one approach that is cost effective. Staples are grown all over, the subcontinent. And, I'll give you an example. In Pakistan, I was in Pakistan just not too long ago and talking to people. They are adopting zinc wheat in Punjab, which is the major wheat growing state in Pakistan, by leaps and bounds. And their, agricultural sort of system, National Agricultural Research System managers were telling us that zinc wheat could be in the next 2-3 years, almost be half of the total production area. So that's significant. And, the impact on food systems, enriching, bringing nutrition to the food systems in a natural way is a real possibility. So affordability, access, all the things that we talked about, bio-fortification has a role to play. Obviously, it's not the silver bullet, but we don't want all the people to be eating cereals all the time. You got to have a diversified diet. But whatever things people consume on the dinner plate, if you can change the staples to this healthy version, that'd be great. Initial reactions. So what jumped out at me was, the problem is there in India. It's a malnutrition is a big problem. There's a lot of diversity in the regions. How do we sort of, bring some, how do we bring more nutritious food on the dinner plate? It's a challenge and an opportunity. Affordability jumped out quite a bit, where people who have means and then people who don't have means are like, that's a huge gap. And then how do we fill that gap? Because it takes time to raise the incomes of the people, but really it's the human capital that is suffering. So what are the most cost-effective, ways, scalable ways of addressing, especially at the bottom of the pyramid? Because that's our human capital, and if you really look at the numbers, unless we raise them, the overall human capital of the nation will suffer. Good to see the gender. I was expecting more imbalances, but I was surprised that the IDSS scores were, pretty close. So that was a good thing. But in a country like India, there are huge opportunities, and I really applaud this community to come together and have these kind of, conversations that drive, actions. And we don't have to, boil the ocean like Purnima, you said. Let's get started with the diets. Get the basics right. And if we get the basics right, I think rest will follow. So I'll stop here, turn it over to you. Happy to, jump in anytime you want me to. But congratulations again. Great study and, a great sort of platform to keep these conversations and then actions out of these to make, the changes that we all want to.
Great, thank you, Arun, for very succinct but really deep comments. I really want to pick up on the let's not try to boil the ocean part of it, but find ways to start where we can and to do the best from wherever we can. Let me now turn to you, Dr. Shankar. I'm not sure I have any one specific area for you to focus on, just given how vast your incredible experience in shaping all kinds of things for nutrition has been. But I do know that, in some of your work with TINI and the trusts, you have invested quite a lot in agriculture nutrition linkages over there. So maybe let's start with that. And, if you feel like you'd like to bring on some additional comments, touching on other parts, more than welcome. But again, your reactions to what you've seen in the food plate mapping and the sources study, and your comments perhaps from the perspective of the kinds of work that you've been trying to support. Over to you, Dr. Shankar.
Thank you, Purnima. Thank you very much for actually setting the context so well. And I will actually take on to some of the work that the Tata Trust has done in this area later, maybe, but I'll just make some broad comments. The reason that we are here and we've been repeatedly talking about the status of nutrition in India is that, we are in the 75th year of our independence and a lot of celebrations, and rightly so, because we have achieved a lot on several fronts. But unfortunately, malnutrition continues to threaten the health and well-being of millions in the country. And we know that it has huge social and economic costs. And as it was mentioned earlier, malnutrition is just the final outcome of a combination of determinants clustered in health, food, and care. But for the sake of today's discussion, if you simply put it, it is the nutritional status depends on what you eat and how well you are to assimilate what you eat. Now, we know that these two proximate determinants are enabled by a number of factors. We won't go into that, and all of us know that quite well. The focus, as Purnima said, will be on food, and further narrow it down, and as you put it, as diet, what you eat, what's on your plate. Now, over the last 75 years, we have significantly reduced food insecurity. But we can't say that of nutrition security. As it is so clearly shown by Sandeep in his thing, as well as the NFHS results, less than 10% of children and about the same number of women who are pregnant or lactating have adequate dietary diversity. So a lot more need to happen. And as Purnima rightly said, we have to look at agriculture to fill this. As she said, there are several other things that agriculture is looked at by development economists, but we, from our perspective, looking at how can it help diversify the diet of people. One of the most striking features in nutrition epidemiology, and that is rarely seen everywhere, is the consistent relationship between poverty and undernutrition. This has an important role because that to a very large extent determines what people are able to afford and eat. Sometimes these things can be overcome with appropriate policy instruments and public action. A clear example here is what we could achieve with Green Revolution. We were, as Professor Swaminathan used to say, a ship-to-mouth existence. To today, we are net exporters of cereals. Operation Floods is another example where the country is the largest producer of milk. But it's really sad to see from what Sandeep showed, the milk is one where you have the widest, gap between what the higher quintiles, wealthy quintiles are able to afford and what the poorer people eat. So we know that just 3 crops, rice and wheat in India, globally rice, wheat and maize, now provide nearly 2/3 of the dietary intake, the dietary energy. This is a sad situation, and this applies more to the poorer. So if we want to ensure nutrition security for all, this will require, we need action at multiple levels. And the most important is agriculture. And as said, agriculture for improving nutrition. And what are the multiple access through which it will work? What are the policy instruments that are required? What happens to people who are dependent on what they grow to a large extent, what depends on people who are dependent on market. Everything requires a different solution. So fortunately in India, IFPRI and others have put up an excellent analytical tool, what they call tackling agriculture nutrition disconnect in India. It has shown clearly the 6 pathways through which we can look at this and improve the food plate of Indians for all sections. I won't go into that. The point is that we have all these tools. Now, it is that we need to move and make these things happen. As we know very well, the nutrition sensitive interventions are highly important if we want to make a difference. I'll just stop there, Purnima. I'll come to some of the specific cases from Tata Trust later, if there is time.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Shankar. Again, I think your comments are just a great reminder of even, in the face of complex challenges, we have to find sort of lean pathways towards creating impact from where we can and deploying all of the instruments that are available to us. Shamal, let me turn to you, again, with sort of the grounded experience that you're having and the work that you're doing with TRIF. What are you seeing here, both in the results, but also in how that affects, where you begin to move with the kind of programming work and community engagement work that TRIF itself is doing? So over to you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you all the panelists and also those who have been joined today, and also those who have not been able to join today, because I hope that they will be listening later and watching it, and will take this message forward with the thought-provoking process. Coming back to the studies is very interesting to see, but at the same time, once I was going through this study, I was remembering a girl. Her name was Rashmi. I had met a few months back in a remote district of Simdega of Jharkhand. I asked, what do you have ate? She was in school. After school, I was in field visits. I met her and asked that. Then she told that in morning I had taken rice. I came here. Then I took midday meal, but I didn't eat it because it was not excited me. Then I asked, who cooked for you? Then she told that it's my mom, but now she is in field. Then I asked her, where is your father? Then she told that there is some, she was not telling it openly, but what I could guess that there might be some conflict within family. And therefore there is, her father is somewhere else, not with the mother, and he is in somewhere, he is working in some of the states. So once I look this study and taking into the face to this, the girl with whom I had met, and I changed the focus from the single girl to many. I found that that is the reflection of that what is going on in the realities. And it gives me an understanding from the first time that what would be in our plate, it should also come from the excitement for the food. So that excitement for the person who will be eating it is more important. I think that might be one of the reasons that when whatever is available in our nearby, we don't like it. So we have to see that what is the study, but that was the answer for the girl, which I had got. So I got the new insight into that for food and nutrition, excitement is also a very important part. And at the same time, the peace is much more important for agriculture security and also nutrition security. If we look today that how the entire worldwide nutrition security has been impacted, it is the 3 words. One is conflict, next is COVID, and the next C is climate change. And these 3 C has been shaping our what we are eating. So what then again, if I look back into the conflict in the global world to the family, then again I realize that the peace within family to get a good plate is much more important. Because if the woman and the family is in peace, in a peace of mind, then within the family it gives a lot of things that which is actually from the farm to what I'll say that to the plate, overall the peacefulness is very important. The way the world look peace for agriculture security and nutrition security, that is other. But from my own experience with interaction with that girl and few more, I realized that respecting empowerment of women is necessary, but at the same time, the peace within family and respecting to the woman is much more important for nutrition security, not only for the family, but for the next generation. And for India, we are a country of 1 billion. To nurture these billion dreams, nutrition security for 1,000 days is much more important. In many ways, it has been tried and tested. I will not get into it. But again, I'll come back to this C. If we have to it has to combine it, then it has to be looked into again 3C. I'll say it is convergence of all the stakeholders. Obviously, not at the national and all those areas, it is fine. But convergence within family, looking this food plate at the family angle, that how an individual is playing it, how the family is making it, and how the nearby communities is contributing to it, and creating the space for the woman, child, and others. Nowadays, all these politicians are saying that we are in a storm of COVID, the whole world. I'll say that yes, we are in a storm, but within this storm, there are few of our mothers and sisters whose boats are broken. So therefore, we should first look into those whose boats are broken. The next part I'll come to it is that community compact at the grassroots level. I'll not want to list those out, everybody knows it, but making convergence to compact is much more important. We may come together, but working together to make a compact is much more important to do it. And obviously the collaboration between how government, private, and other people will do. And with that, I should end with the last note that once we are looking it into, then obviously in TRF perspective, we see that it is not only the family to make our nutrition security, it's need many more things. Once we focus into agriculture, it's also the soil and many more things. One is agriculture, livelihood, water, climate change, and at the same time how market is playing. And greater than that, where the poor is concerned, then how the government policies and schemes are more accessible to them. But overall, to do this, it is more important that how focused we are, and more than nutrition sensitivity, I appeal again that it is sensitivity to our own heart is more important. That whether we are sensitive to enough or not, because this NFHS 5 itself saying that 20% of two very interesting data has came. One is showing that some 20 to 30% of the higher economic strata is also malnourished. It means that if we have everything also, then sensitivity is most required at the family or wherever level it is. The second part is that many of the almost 20 around numbers, I could not recall the exact figure, that this malnourishment in India happened in early 6 months of the life. If that is the case, and the only solution is breastfeeding. So how will be, once we are looking the plate within the family, but at the same time creating that conducive environment for our next generation to nurture the billion dreams is more important, and the way forward for a nutrition security in India. I should stop here and give back to you, Purnimaji.
Thank you so much, Shamal. You know, again, I think you really spoke from the heart, and reminded us all of how it is absolutely so important. You know, in otherwise, you know, in situations where things may seem like they're working okay, but to recognize that so many boats are broken, and that we should really begin to focus on those whose boats are really broken. I also really want to thank you for bringing up the gender angle and the sort of the real situation of what women's lives are often like in the context of, you know, poverty, but perhaps even outside of poverty. Because it's something, you know, a set of things that happen around food and nutrition and gender that, you know, we don't often acknowledge and talk about enough, beyond not in real ways. So I'm really grateful that you brought that up. It's also just a great reminder that while we may see things in the data that suggest that, okay, the diets of men and women maybe are not that different or are reasonably converging, a lot else is happening in households that, affects perhaps people's nutritional outcomes or their health status, that, we really should be thinking about and paying a lot of attention to. Personally, anytime, I think there are other things than food that relate very much to gender and the food-related space that I think we haven't even talked about. So, for example, we haven't talked about women's time. Who spends the time to prepare, healthy family meals? If we want entire households and families to eat healthy diets, whose time is going into doing all of the work that creates that? What are the gendered roles within households that lead to the quality of people's diets? I also wanted to reflect again, it's sort of linked to the gender frame, but the idea, I think, Sandeep, in what you presented, that it may not just be affordability of food that affects what people eat. I also wanted us perhaps to reflect on the things that actually go into preparing food, fuel, water. Do you have, a 2-burner stove or a 1-burner stove? Do you have LPG? Do you have enough vessels to cook your food? And the number of reasons why somebody is poor may not consume a very diverse diet, I think, go beyond just the affordability of the food itself, but about all of the other inequities that exist around, just the food space. And I honestly think we are not talking about those kinds of things. I'm a mother. I'm a person who thinks about what food is cooked in my home, who, cooks also. And, I'm always sort of, you think about how important things like water are when you want to eat things like green vegetables. How often do those have to be washed? Where is the water to do that come from? Where is the equipment to do those kinds of things coming from? And I think we have to begin the process of slowly unlocking all the things that happen around food acquisition, food preparation, to get to these ideas of how does gender play out within homes, and how it plays out actually affect, what people eat. Going beyond food insecurity, what does fuel insecurity and energy insecurity and water insecurity do to how people approach food within their daily lives? Again, I think a lot of boxes to be opened there. And at some level, I believe there are solutions available for all of those boxes. But if we want to transform diets, I think we have to understand the full continuum of what happens, all the way from production to what happens within homes and communities in terms of how food is prepared, consumed, and made available to everyone. Also thinking about the fact that this is what we're expecting people to do day in and day out, many times a day, when we think about what healthy diets mean. And, so it's not a one-time investment. It's something where you really have to ease the burden on a daily basis for people to be able to begin to prepare and consume healthy diets, right? Diverse diets. Let us maybe look at a few of the questions and the comments in the panel. So I'm going to take a look at some of the questions and then direct them. So there are a couple of questions that relate to seeds and bio-fortification and GMOs. So let me, ask perhaps if Shamal and Arun, you can address those. They've been, so I'll ask I'll ask them together and then call on both of you. So for you, Arun, biofortified crops have been criticized as a gateway for genetically modified seeds. And so, if you could reflect on that. And then also, actually, maybe Dr. Shankar, you can also comment on the second related question within that, which is, instead of or in the context of, fortified foods, which is, positioned as an artificial solution, should we not be thinking about enriching the soil with required nutrients, as a potential sustainable solution? And related to that is a question around community seed systems and nutritional security, again, that links to, the idea of where seeds are held, and, the links with GMOs or with other seed systems that are not community seed systems. So maybe could the three of you take that first round of questions, and then I will come back to, some of the additional questions that relate to, I think the next two questions here relate to convergence. So maybe Arun, you could go first, and then Shamal, and then Dr. Shankar.
Yeah, thanks, Purnima. So this is not a surprise question. So look, the bio-fortified crops are a new technology, so we expect these kind of questions, and I'm glad people are asking. So, a gateway to GM. So let me begin with, what are the ways you can develop bio-fortified crops. So, like I said, there are, I would say, three main ways. One is conventional breeding, which is just like, what we have been doing for thousands and thousands of years, crossing two different, varieties or lines, and then, selecting for what you are looking for, right? So that's what conventional, crop breeders do. So that's one approach. The second approach is also you can apply, you can get increased levels of micronutrients in the crops through agronomic biofortification. What does that mean is, for example, for zinc, you can apply a foliar application of a fertilizer, and that also sort of increases the uptake and increases the densities and the uptake of the micronutrient into the grain. So that's the other way. So the second way, agronomic biofortification. And the third way is GM route, right? So, recently, Erie in the Philippines, released vitamin A, golden rice. So that's a product of GM technology. So all the crops can be bred in these ways. GM can be a role to breed crops. In fact, in Bangladesh, we have eggplant or brinjal that is, that is a GM route. Eggplant takes about 35 sprays of insecticides and fungicides to keep it, sort of keep it growing because of the infestation of insects, etc. And now the GM technology literally eliminates that. The GM technology has been, safe. I mean, I live in the US. I've been eating, products, that are derived from GM, so for human health, there's enough study that says GM technology is safe, but I'm not promoting GM here. I'm coming back to the Indian context. So Indian Council of Agricultural Research is very big on biofortification. They have adopted the technology. They're going the conventional route, and many crops are coming out, through conventional breeding with biofortification. So no, I don't think it's a gateway. The governments choose what technology they want to bring into their countries. As Harvest Plus, we started with conventional route. We believe that there is a huge urgency to address the malnutrition problems in South Asia, Africa, and conventional route is the most non-controversial, but that doesn't mean it's the best route. I would say that agronomic fortification, conventional coming together, and in some cases GM may be the answer, but no, I don't think it's a gateway. I don't think we should hold ourselves back in adopting these crops. In fact, I'm convinced that, I look at Pakistan, the next door neighbor, and they have high zinc wheat. It's going to be almost half the area. It's all conventionally bred, And why can't we move that to the Punjab in India and make a significant contribution in improving food systems here and making them more nutritious, at least on the cereal side. So yeah, I mean, I don't think we should get hung up. Whoever asked the question, the governments are smart and will follow the government route. Whatever acceptance the government is ready to adopt in terms of technology, will go that route. But no, I don't think it's a gateway to GM. Please, be open to ideas and new technologies and improve the health and nutrition of the people.
Thank you, Arun. Shamal, would you like to come in on those questions about seed systems, and if you have any comments on the GM issue as well, please?
I don't have much expertise into these areas, but what I can share that, see, if we look at how we eat and how actually the families practice it, one is that how policies and other things would be happening, and the market and the way it has been adopted, and people accept it, adopted it, tried it, those things will happen. But if we look back that what is happening in our rural communities and at the family level, that is also very important. Long way this how we'll be mixing it with that conventional way of doing it, which are the good seeds, how it would be done, those things are others. But what is changing, I should like to highlight those areas what I have been observing for last few years, that with this new road construction in the entire country with Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, what has happened that entire countrywide this new road has came and the entire habitation is changing. What I've found once way back to my home or in other places when I'm traveling, earlier these households used to be inside that from the villages, and there might be some spaces where that families will be producing seeds, whatever they use it, but there was a space for it. Although in Northeast it is exist in some areas, but other parts of the country, the entire villages are coming out from that old habitation system, and the entire village is now settling in both the side of this newly constructed Pradhan Mantri road, which was coming. And therefore, in rural India also, the way we had looked it earlier, that food will be coming from that nearby sides or within the years, that is changing. And we have to, I don't have any data, but other things, but at very ground areas that we have to see that with changing of this habitation, and these families are coming to the roadside and leaving their old houses in back, with also the population is rising, therefore there is no space at all. But the nearby space, nearby the houses, the space to grow food for the families, at least few things which used to grow earlier, that is changing. So if that is the changing, then how will be bringing solutions within that that space and within that family setting? I think that would be that area. I think I will be looking into Sankar sir to that area, but that is the area which I am looking is changing rapidly in last I think last 7-8 years. I should stop here.
Thank you, Shamal. Really reflections on important challenges to food production and localizing some of that. Dr. Shankar, what are your thoughts on this set of issues?
Thanks. I'll come to that fortification thing later. Just to take on from what Shamal said. Yeah, we all know that a greater proportion of people are moving away from subsistence agriculture and becoming part of cash economy. Though we know that women in agriculture is very important, and nearly 85% of those who are working as women are all smallholder farmers, and they do consume a lot of what they do produce. But then the fact is, they're also, what they produce is so small that doesn't suffice all their requirement. There are other incomes, and so they're part of the cash economy. They're dependent on the social safety net, as well as they're dependent on the market. Now, how can we change? We know very well for this section of the people, to a large extent, we've been able to satiate hunger. I'm not saying it's not there. I mean, it's food insecurity has become, we reduce the proportion of people who are food insecure, but how do we move to make more and more people nutrition secure? The current food system is causing both the ends of malnutrition. That is, it is causing both overweight, obesity, as well as it is causing undernutrition. And of course, straddling both this is macronutrient deficiency. So move away from just this large cereal-based diet to a diversified diet. We are producing more fruits and vegetables than before. Anytime you look at it, we say we are number one in milk production, but it is not accessible to the communities, both in terms of physical access as well as economic access. It's the same case with fruits and vegetables. A lot of it is wasted. So as we move through appropriate agriculture policies to increase the diversified production of nutrient-dense crops, fruits, vegetables, you need appropriate policy instruments that will create economic and physical access to these food items that are essential to maintain optimum nutrition. I think it's not a simple thing, but we are dealing with huge smallholder farmers group. So there are attempts being made. I think we should work in that direction to see that if we can make cereals today, every family, rich or poor, at least have access to a big portion of what they consume as energy. And we need to diversify it, and it is possible. If we have been able to do it through Green Revolution and Operation Floods and make these things available, we can also make it, and we have to move in that direction. Now, coming to this issue about, I don't know whether it is feasible to really enrich the soil, and it can really increase. There are, the very attempt by these fertilizers is to enrich the soil and then get that back into the thing. But food fortification, as we practice, we talk not about few items that are fortified, but about staple food. Fortification is often instigated by public health authorities wherever you find that majority of the population is at risk for micronutrient deficiencies. This has to be very closely monitored by the public health authorities and necessary changes made. And as the diet diversifies and as the deficiency states come down, there has to be suitable modification. It's not something that you do for once and continue with that forever. So today, we believe that there is widespread micronutrient deficiencies, and using food fortification is a sensible complementary strategy. It is not an end in itself, nor is it something which has to stay permanent. All countries that have used the strategy, many of them have moved away from it. As the economic status improves, as access to most of the population to diversified diet increases, the need for adding vitamins and minerals to commonly eaten food should come down. So I'll stop there. Anything else?
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Shankar. We have but another sort of cluster of questions that, really speak to this issue of coming together or, convergence. And so, let me try to ask you to reflect, each of you to reflect maybe briefly on that. So there's two questions here, from a systems thinking lens, what areas do you think needs to be strengthened in different departments to sort of achieve the goal of having more locally grown nutritious food on the plate, given the contextuality, et cetera. And similar to that is a question from Anirban about, concrete pathways to trigger actions at the grassroots. So let me, try to see if each of you, I'm just trying to see if there are additional questions to that relate to that. No, okay. So these two are sort of questions about coming together and perhaps addressing multiple constraints. So maybe we can go in reverse order. Dr. Shankar, do you want to maybe comment on that first, and then Shamal, and then Arun?
Yeah, I had the pleasure of working and learning from TRI and what they were trying to do through the Agriculture Ministry and the allied ones. And that's the time I realized that we don't really need any more new policy or new program. The problem is that all of them that are in place need to be implemented and implemented well. It's more an issue of implementation failure and of course convergence. They're all in silos. The way that these different departments are created is silos are necessary for them to function. But what is really required is we can't break the silos and bring everybody together. What is really needed is for these allied departments and ministries at the central and state level to come together, to plan together, create a kind of a framework to report and take stock. The real action of breaching this silos happens on the ground. And probably that is where, we have to get a model. And I think TRI, somebody, if they could speak, they had an excellent model of saying, how do we create this convergence at the top in terms of creating a framework to work together and then really do it on ground at the village level. That is what we have to aim at. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Shankar. Shamal, and maybe actually Neerja, you could also come in with any, specific thoughts on sort of the coming together at the grassroots, and then we can move to Arun, if any thoughts he has on that. So maybe Shamal first and then Neerja.
Yeah. See, if we look at how to make it implemented at the ground, then I think this is an opportunity that when we have found that a large number of women has been came together with SHGs, and they are forming and practicing and meeting regularly within an interval time. Interestingly, this woman and child is also coming from those communities. These are from the same families. So therefore, it is an opportunity that how we'll be leveraging it, that power of women and power of collectiveness of poorest of the poor together, and bringing it together with the other two systems. That is, one is that service providers, and another one is that PRIs, that Panchayati Raj institutions. If these three pod at the ground can work together, we found that it is possible to change that what we are seeing today. And to do that, it is also important and keeping that hope that during COVID we have seen that when hospitals was closed, when the entire country was locked down, everybody was inside the home, working from home. This is that women who had come out with that their localities, with their women collectives, with panchayats, came together to create a community level compact to save the lives, even sometimes without taking food for self as offered others. So that solidarity which has already existed, which has been nurtured, that has to be again strengthened and brought together to do better way, that how it can be done. That is that one way to look, and that's the way that we at TRIF look. And at the same time, that entire thinking process has to be changed. We have seen that in initial itself that in last 75 years it has not changed. And I'll go back to a song of Bhupen Hazarika. He had told that if the person is without personality, if the institutions is not without leadership, and if your thought is not better for the people, then why Ganga you are not vanishing everything? So I would just going through that whatever we have created the architecture, if it has not been able to reduce this malnourishment, then we should also look from top to down that where the flaws has gone. For long back we have been seen that there is a nodal ministry who is looking into, definitely it is required, but to change that part to the community side, that those who are coming, for which families they are coming, the solutions is right there. So how will we bringing them together within the villages level, at the hamlets level, And at the same time, not only targeting to the children, that our system is targeting only the vulnerable children. We would like to see that instead of looking the vulnerable children, we should look into the vulnerable parents, the vulnerable families. So that the way we should look in differently, and that's why we are trying to look at.
Thank you, Shamal. I have to say that's music to my ears. You know, I've been saying for years to people that we simply cannot afford to just focus on children, because children grow up in families, and until we sort of really focus on vulnerable families and get them all of their rights, entitlements, all of the societal support that we can, so that those boats are patched up and even rebuilt sometimes, you know, you're just not going to have a situation where, you know, children cannot flourish when their families don't flourish. And it is amazing to me as a society that we think we can change things for children without really, you know, supporting families. Neerja, some of maybe your thoughts again from, you know, your work with TRI at the grassroots, and then I'll come to Arun after that.
Yeah, I'll speak on two levels. One is on the ground, so with some examples. So for example, seeds availability is an issue. The quality of seeds is an issue. Production of seeds is not, you know, targeted towards production of nutritious crops. So these sort of issues need to be sorted out. And again, connecting that to Shamal's focus on, you know, creating that compact between communities, government functionaries, and PRIs, that these sort of interventions need to be strengthened. A little bit, I'll touch a little bit upon food bio-fortification, because what happens, you start with the good intent from the top, and as it trickles down to the ground, the acceptance in terms of production as well as consumption. So they call the communities who have been, you know, where these things have been piloted, they have called it plastic food, and that we don't want to consume. This is the kind of feedback that, you know, at certain places that we've received from the communities. So how can we, you know, sustain that level of quality that is in the intent, and, you know, trickle it down towards the communities? How do we maintain that quality of intervention as it trickles down to the ground? Fuel availability, like you also stressed upon, is another concern, especially for women, because they are the ones who go out in search of fuel in case it's not available, and it's a tedious, monotonous, everyday job. And, you know, we also need to focus on that. Another example that we worked on is on tackling anemia. So where we rolled in or roped in SSGs to help tackle anemia in agriculture as well as behavior change. So since we also stressed upon habits that require that we must change, you know, either you get tested for anemia, at the same time you have access and you prepare iron-rich food at home. So these are the kind of things that we have tried on the ground. And if we come above all this from a, you know, government's perspective, and how can governments work on it?
Oh, I think we lost Neerja. Just in the interest of time, we have just a few minutes left. Arun, could I maybe call on you to address that? And actually, while you're on addressing, you know, this question of coming together, etc., could maybe, if you have also any closing remark to make, because we literally have 6 minutes to go to the end. Right. That would also be great. There are a lot of questions in the Q&A box, and, you know, I'm afraid we just won't be able to get to all of them at this point. But yeah. So Arun, maybe a response to that set of questions on convergence, coming together, and then a closing remark from you.
Yeah, so really quick from my side, you know, coming and listening to all the conversations, malnutrition solving, you know, will require coming together. So obviously the community, the governments have a role to play. We as individuals have a role to play. I represent one side of a solution, you know, which is biofortified staple crops. So quickly, you know, coming together. So a few thoughts. Policy is a powerful lever that we all should pull, and we have the power to do that. I'll give some examples where policies, you know, new policies, regulations, and implementation of the existing ones. So, where we see staple crops, nutritious staple crops can play a big role, is inclusion of them in the social protection programs like PDS, midday meals. We saw Sandeep's presentation, a lot of cereals are sort of access through PDS besides, on-farm consumption. Variety release, the governments play a big role in crop variety release. Why can't we have some sort of a regulation that the varieties that are being released are more nutritious than the previous one? So incremental, at least, whatever we release, it's just not about yield and empty calories, but then addresses nutrition. So these are very simple, practical examples of how policies, which policies, which are the big ones to make. And again, we're targeting the people who don't have the affordability access, the bottom, of that range that we saw in the presentation. How do we lift them up? Because unless we lift them up, it's not going to happen. And then, the community coming together, it's very, very important as well. I just am returning from Nairobi, Kenya. They have high iron beans, and the smallholder farmers and the mothers, and a lot of women farm. We should not forget that women have a big contribution in farming. And I asked them, can I, why? How do you sell this? But they're saying that no, we're not selling it. We're giving 1 kg to our women friend so that they can get access to iron, because after eating these high iron beans, we are seeing a significant improvement in her health. So I think this community, farmer to farmer diffusion, knowledge, etc., is also a very powerful way. Farmers and rural communities believe in other farmers and what other rural sort of, their neighbors are saying. So if we can tap into that mechanism and get the right nutrition messaging, I think that is very simple, effective way, because, it's all about trust. And I think Neeraj talked about plastic foods and, it is simply that they don't have enough trust. So how do we get, how do we collaborate with these, partners of ours who are so smarter than us, I would say, even though they are rural, they get it. And if we can tap into that community of partners, I think our amplification of what we're trying to do will be a lot more stronger and a lot more convincing. So I'll stop here.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, great, thanks. We literally have 2 minutes to go. So Shamal, a 30-second closing bite from you. Dr. Shankar, quick closing bite from you. That would be great. Shamal?
New days will come in hand of people.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Shankar.
Thanks, Purnima. Waiting to hear you.
Oh, no, I have, I could not even begin to try to summarize everything that we've heard. But I just, I really want to thank TRIF again for having us over here. I left with, going back to, for example, what we heard earlier, that there is still a road to be traveled. I hope it's neither too long nor too difficult, but there is a road to be traveled to get to healthier plates for all, both across all of India and within communities, and even it seems like the within households situation isn't as bad as the within communities situation. So, I think there's a lot to think about in terms of, various forms of equity there. And clearly the insights of, where is people's food coming from, the very, very critical role of markets, especially of local markets, is something that, we really need to think hard about. The agriculture to nutrition discussion can absolutely not be a simplified discussion of, if you produce a little bit at home, your diets are going to improve. It's very clear that people's food is coming from very different places. And so as we look at the entirety of what we want to see on people's plates, I think we also have to acknowledge and really think about how do you shape the entirety of how food gets onto people's plates. not just where their food is bought from, but I think, in today's conversation, we also try to unpack a little bit what happens to food and ingredients after they're bought in markets and before they get onto plates. What are some of the additional beyond food security issues that we need to think about in terms of time, gender roles, energy. And so we are beginning, I think we're just scratching the surface here. But to me, what was very powerful was, the recognition that by having this data in hand, it begins to allow us to go deeper, to question our own assumptions. And we need to see more of it, So I'm going to put more pressure on the TRIF team to say, hey, it's not enough that you just now did this at the region level. You have to take it deeper. We have to go down to at least to the district level. And we have to begin to unpack it, even after, okay, where does the food come from in the market, to how does it get onto the plates, and begin to understand even that pathway. Because there are gender dimensions to that, there are equity dimensions to that. And we have to find solutions, bit by bit by bit. I really want to, we have to acknowledge the ocean and the importance of the ocean without, saying that we individuals or that communities in their hands have everything they need to solve that. But I think our goal, I really want to end. Shamal, you really brought your heart to your comments. And that really spoke to me, because it is just an incredible reminder that people's lives are where we have to center actions, not on what we are comfortable with doing or what we are able to do, but by understanding people's lives, by understanding which boats need to be repaired, which boats need to be lifted, and what is really, affecting a boat that isn't going in the direction that it wants to go in. The patch that is needed may not be the patch that we have in our hands. And that's why I think when we understand the situation of the boats, we can find, all of the things that need to come together to make the repairs that are going to make that boat move at the speed, the scale, and towards the destination that it wants, which in this case and in this focus is perhaps people's diets. But I like the boat metaphor a lot. You may hear me use it more in the future. But I want to thank you all. I just think this was an incredible community of people that came together on this conversation. I apologize that we've gone a little bit over time. And I also really apologize that we haven't been able to address all the questions that people had. So I really hope that the TRIF team, again, I'm putting the pressure on you, that you collect all of the questions that you see, so that, either in next year's colloquy or perhaps even in a standalone one, if there is enough energy around a certain set of questions, that, we can foster and host another dialogue that, helps get us to that. So let me stop here. Thank you again for the wonderful opportunity to be with you today. Neerja, I don't know if you have any sort of closing logistics notes or anything else as a moderator, but I'll end my commentary here and hand it back to you.
So I really, really want to thank you for a wonderful session. Before closing, I would like to thank each one of you, because generally we are so focused on our work, we sort of lack the perspective, and this is one of those objectives where we, bring different perspectives together and broaden our horizons. So thank you, all of you, for this wonderful session. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Good night.
Thank you very much.